This video will go through the rest of species, communities, and ecosystems, focusing on species and nutrient cycles and sustainable ecosystems. We'll cover the rest of the understandings from 4.1. So we'll start with some definitions, or a definition. So with a species, this is a group of individuals that meet in nature and can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. This is the key part to helping to define a species, is the fact that they can produce offspring that can go on to produce their own offspring. As a result, members of the same species will have a common gene pool, and then within that gene pool there will be variation amongst those genes. In order to be classified as a species, organisms have to meet 3 requirements. So the organisms must be able to breed, so they have to have similar structures that will allow that to occur. The organisms must breed under natural conditions. And then the third requirement is that the offspring be fertile. So those offspring are able to go on to have their own offspring, and those offspring can go on to have their own offspring, etc., etc. A species is also made up of organisms that have similar physiological and morphological characteristics that can be observed and measured. So basically, there are unique characteristics to those species that help them to be identified. Occasionally, members of different species will breed. However, the offspring will always be infertile. So you can have two different species that are breeding together that produce a viable offspring, but that offspring will be infertile, so it's not able to go and have its own offspring. This will prevent the genes. This is also what prevents the genes from 2 different species from becoming mixed. So, for example, if you have a male lion that breeds with a female tiger, you can get an offspring that is referred to as a liger. This liger is infertile and cannot go on to have its own offspring. Similarly, you can have a horse that is bred with a donkey, and the resulting organism is referred to as a mule, which is infertile. So you can have within a species groups within that species that don't interact and don't interbreed. So you can get populations now that can become isolated. So groups from a species can become separated from the rest of the species. This can happen through a number of different means, by geographical barriers, or through the development of different behaviors. So you can have groups that can become isolated geographically. So where you get a mountain range that separates these 2 groups, they can't interbreed as a result. You can get ecological isolation, and this is where 2 groups within a species can occupy different portions of an ecosystem. And because they occupy those different areas of that ecosystem, they rarely interact and rarely interbreed. You can also get temporal isolation. This is where different groups will breed during different times of the year, and basically limits the groups interbreeding as well. And then you can also get behavioral isolation. This is where different groups within a species may develop different mating calls or different mating rituals that now you get 2 different groups that may not interbreed. All of this basically can result in isolated populations that evolve in different ways, which over time could result in speciation. So you get the development of a new species occurring. When this results now, if those 2 groups, which are now separate species, were to now be able to interact, they may not be able to interbreed, or if they do interbreed, they wouldn't be able to generate fertile offspring. Nutrient cycles are also very important to the health of an ecosystem and to the sustainability of an ecosystem. So autotrophs and heterotrophs obtain all their inorganic nutrients, such as sodium, potassium, and calcium, from the abiotic environment. And when we talk about the abiotic environment, we are talking about non-living factors in an ecosystem. So, for example, the temperature of that ecosystem, the rocks that are found within it, the water sources such as rivers or streams or lakes or ponds or marshes are all considered part of that abiotic environment. Autotrophs obtain organic nutrients such as carbon and nitrogen from their environment. And usually, so for example, carbon is taken in the form of CO2. Nitrogen would be taken in the form of nitrates or nitrites, while heterotrophs have to obtain these nutrients from their food. So heterotrophs will consume other things to get those organic nutrients. This supply of nutrients is basically maintained by the cycling of matter. So you have matter that is cycled throughout an ecosystem. The two main cycles are carbon and nitrogen. The carbon cycle we'll come back to in subtopic 4.3. So the following diagram also gives an example of how minerals can be cycled through an environment. So in the first part of the diagram, you have all these minerals located in the soil. You have a tree that now grows in that soil and will take in some of those minerals. So those minerals get incorporated into the tissues within the tree. That tree can eventually die and return to the ground, and as it starts to decompose, those minerals will be returned back to the soil to be now reused by other living organisms. So ultimately, this will contribute to a sustainable ecosystem. So sustainability basically refers to the ability of an ecosystem to exist indefinitely. So nutrients are available are cycled on a continuous basis, always making them readily available to other organisms, helping sustain the variety and diversity of species within that ecosystem. So as there are a limited number of resources on Earth, sustainability is crucial for the survival of species within ecosystems. And there are three requirements in order for an ecosystem to be sustainable. So there has to be nutrient availability, there has to be detoxification of waste products, that's usually where the decomposers come into play, and there has to be energy availability. For the majority of ecosystems that we deal with, that energy availability is in the form of the sun, and the main input of energy into those ecosystems. Ultimately, all that matter and all that energy, well, all the matter can be cycled through those ecosystems, while energy will flow through an ecosystem. So that's it for the video. This can be found on the Google slideshow that provided the link to this video.